We like transformation stories, don't you? Don't you like transformation stories? You get to hear about a person's life, and you see a person that has gone from something that they were struggling with in their life, and they overcome that thing, and they become something new. I was at the ACU lectureships back in the early 2000s, and some of you weren't born then, but in the early 2000s, I was there, and this guy, he was from California, and he had this big testimonial, and the testimonial went something like this. I was raised in the streets of San Francisco. I got involved in gang warfare, and I was a part of these gangs, and I was doing all these evil things, and I was pushing drugs on people, and I was in violent situations, and he just told us all of this stuff. He said that he came to know Jesus through some friends. He was baptized, and it absolutely changed his life. In fact, he got to following Jesus so closely that he decided that he wanted to be a minister. And he went to school and he became a minister and had been serving churches for 20 years at that time. And anyway, he was done telling his testimonial there, his transformation story. I was sitting with a group of guys, and two guys down from me, one of the guys said this out loud. He says, "Man, I wish I had a story like that." And we all looked at him and said, "No, you don't. Nobody wants a story like that. Transformation stories are great, but you don't want to go down into the depths and depravity of life and have to come back out of that." I don't have that story. I was raised going to church. I was a pretty good kid. My parents referred to me as the good son, right? I did mostly the right things. I didn't get caught on a few other things. I wasn't perfect, but I was a pretty good kid. And got married and raised a family. I've tried to live a life that is good. I try to be a good example. I've tried to share the gospel with many, many people, and I have a fairly ordinary life, though. I don't have like a sordid past. And so when we talk about transformation stories, sometimes we think in these big terms, right? These umbrella terms, where so it's not a transformation story unless something significant has taken place from a sordid past to living a new life of faith in God. Well, transformation stories, more often than not, are not sensational stories. More often than not, they're ordinary stories, aren't they? If you look at your life and you look at the changes that you've made in your life, they're more often than not, they're going to be subtle changes that you've made, not revolutionary changes that you've made. Maybe today you're better at talking to your spouse than you were years ago, and you've learned how to be kind and gentle in the way that you interact. Maybe after you got that little child at home there and you're trying to figure out how to raise him, you got a little bit better at that, and you transformed into the parent that your children need. Or maybe you became a Christian, you put away some abusive speech and you put away some thoughts that you used to have that were inappropriate. Maybe you used to steal, but now you have a job and you're doing things to be generous to other people. These are the stories of ordinary people doing ordinary things, learning how to be the people that God calls us to be in ordinary life. And we don't have to have some sensational change for us to be the faithful people that God calls us to. And I think that's interesting as you look at this particular story of Jesus in the miracle at Cana. It's not particularly a sensational story. It's not a rags to riches kind of story. It's not taking someone's life who's gone off the deep end, whatever that means, and come back and lived a new faithful life. There's a simple problem. It has to do with honor and shame, and Jesus enters into that, and he does something about it in sort of a miraculous and yet ordinary sort of way. And I want you to see that today. At the end of the last chapter, Jesus has revealed to Nathanael that he had seen him doing something, and Nathanael was amazed by that. Like, how could you see me? How could you know that? And Jesus responds to him, he says, "Wow, you're really shocked about that? That really impressed you." And it did, and he says, "Well, you're going to see a lot more than that. You're going to see a lot more than this." And what we see today is the beginning of the things that Nathanael and the disciples and all those who are around Jesus throughout the gospel are going to see about Jesus as he begins to demonstrate his glory, as he begins to demonstrate his true identity, as he lives out what it means for him to be the Lamb of God, what it means for him to be the Word that has become flesh and lived among us, as he lives out what it means to be the Son of Man and the Son of God simultaneously, as it lives out the life of what it means to be a teacher and a miracle worker and a Messiah. Like, all these things become evident, and this is the first story. I did want to make a little bit of a comment about this before we go. I heard a guy preach on this particular chapter a few years ago, and he made Jesus out, because he turned water into wine, he made Jesus out to be a party animal. I'm not going to do that today, okay? I don't think that's what was going on here. In fact, we'll talk a little bit about wine in the Bible today. We'll talk a little bit about the content and why this is an important thing. But this was not Jesus saying, hey, it's okay to go out and be a wild person and party and drink as much as you'd like. That's not what he is saying in the story. And to make Jesus out to be that would be a mistake. We're not going to do that today. Jesus is not the eternal party pooper either, but he's also not a party animal in the sense that we would think of him. And again, we're going to see again today how it is that we often read these texts through the lens of what we have experienced rather than letting the text read us and tell us how to think. We'll see that in a couple of ways today. So let's begin reading here, John chapter 2, beginning at verse 1. It says, on the third day, just after Jesus was with the disciples, now they're moving on into the ministry of Jesus. And it says, on the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Her name is Mary, from all the gospel accounts. And both Jesus and his disciples were invited to the wedding. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, they have no wine. And Jesus said to her, woman, what does this have to do with us? My hour has not yet come. His mother said to the servants, whatever he says to you, do it. Now there were 6 stone water pots set there for the Jewish custom of purification. These were purification pots. So they have water in there. You would usually wash or rinse yourself for ritualistic purposes with these things, containing 20 or 30 gallons in each. Roughly said, there's somewhere between 110 and 160 gallons of water that Jesus is going to do a miracle with. It says that Jesus said to them, fill all the water pots with water. So they filled them up to the brim, and he said to them, draw some out and now take it to the head waiter. So they took it to him. When the head waiter tasted the water, which had become wine, shocker, right? That's not what they were expecting, and did not know where it had come from, but the servants who had drawn the water knew. The head waiter called the bridegroom and said to them, every man deserves the good wine first, serves the good wine first, and when the people have drunk freely, then he serves the poorer wine, but you have kept the good wine until now. This beginning of his signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee and manifested his glory. Pay attention to that. He manifested, or he made known his glory, and his disciples believed in him. These weddings that they would have in the first century in this territory here in Cana near Galilee were different than what we experience when we go to a wedding. When we go to a wedding, we typically set aside a day, maybe an afternoon and an evening. We have the wedding ceremony. Maybe we have a meal. We have maybe some celebration and some dancing and things like that that go on as we celebrate this new couple that's joined together. And we do that for just about, a few hours, right? But that's not how that worked in this culture in the first century. In the first century, they would host a wedding that would go on for 5 to 7 days. They would go on for a significant period of time. And what they would do is the family would put this wedding on, and the people would have to go through and just enjoy these days together for 5 to 7 days. How many of you have been tired of being at a wedding after 5 to 7 hours? Okay. Well, this was 5 to 7 days, but it was a very culturally engaging thing. And they had food together, and they shared stories together, and they spent time together. And it was the responsibility of one of the members of the household that they would be in charge of the event. And it was their responsibility to take this on and make sure that the guests were all invited, to make sure that they had what they needed throughout the time that they were there. Family were in town, things like that. And they would go about doing this big date, this big week together. And it was a big celebration. And what had happened here with this story is about some length of time through this, who knows, 4 or 5 days, maybe, no, I guess probably 3 days into it, they have a dilemma. What's the dilemma? Well, they've run out of wine. And you might think to yourself, well, what's the big deal? Just serve them water. Well, there was a reason they were drinking wine instead of water. Do you know what it is? Wine was safer to drink than water. The water in those days had to be purified. It was not that clean. It was a very difficult thing to come by. So they would take and they would use wine more often than not for most of their drinking, and not for maybe the reasons that people drink wine today. And so here they're running out of wine, and it's not a minor inconvenience. There's another problem, and the problem is that in this culture you have what's called an honor and shame culture. And in an honor and shame culture, it would be dishonorable and it would be shameful for you to have run out of these elements into the time of having this big celebration. And so Jesus and his disciples are invited to come to this ordinary event that people commonly engaged in, and it is a socially significant moment, and then they have this problem. And now the question is Jesus going to do something about this? Is Jesus going to respond to the problem that cannot be ignored? By the way, wine in the Bible is known to be associated with joy. It's known to bring gladness to a person's heart. It's known to be something that was used for the sacrificial system. You've heard Paul maybe write this in the New Testament where he says that I was poured out like a drink offering upon the altar of the faith. In the Old Testament, they didn't just have grain offerings. They didn't just have animal offerings. They would also have drink offerings. And also this was associated with not just that, but also with covenant relationships. So wine has a connection to all of these things. So they have no wine, and there's this possibility that the family is going to be shamed in this situation. And so Mary brings the problem to Jesus. And it's interesting how she brings it, okay? Now, when I do marriage counseling, I always bring up this problem of what we call negative interpretation. I want you to hang on to this for a second. If you have maybe some marriage issues, maybe this will be a little helpful, but it's going to make sense to this text in a minute. When you have a negative interpretation, what that means is that when your spouse says something, you hear it in the worst possible way. Have you ever done that? Don't look at each other. Just nod your head with me. Yes, we have done that, right? If you've been married more than 5 minutes, you've probably said something that was not heard in the way that you intended it, right? And so negative interpretation is when I hear something in the worst possible way. Jan and I, years ago, she's going to kick me for telling you this later, but that's fine. I've got tough knees. But years ago, we were getting ready to go somewhere, and we were running late, and it wasn't me. I was ready to go. She was not ready to go. And she came downstairs with like her third different outfit on, and she says, do you like this outfit? And I'm like, I liked all of the outfits. Let's just take this one. And she got mad at me because she thought I was saying that maybe I didn't really like the outfit, but I was just saying it to get out of there, which is kind of what I was doing, but I still like the outfit. But she heard me in a negative way. I really just wanted to leave and go because we were late. So you hear each other in negative ways, and you respond in negative ways when you hear that. When we hear Mary talking to Jesus and Jesus talking back, we often hear it through a different filter of another conversation that you've had with somebody else. Have you ever said to your children when they've been told to do something or they know there's something they're supposed to do, and you just say to them, are you just going to sit there? What do you mean when you say that? What if your child just heard that rationally and said, I was thinking about it. Now that you mention it, I think I will just sit here. What did you mean when you said that? You need to run for your life or you need to do what I said, but either way, you better start moving. Or maybe you've been in a setting where your spouse wanted you to do something and they just say to you something like this, are you going to do something about this? What do they mean? Do they mean that you should say back, I don't know. I was thinking about maybe, I don't know, I'll give you an answer in a while. No, they expect that you're going to do something about it. And so since we've had those conversations, when Mary comes along and she says, hey, we're out of wine, is there an expectation that she has with that? And when Jesus responds, and I'll say it this way, woman, what difference does that make to us? Do you see the difference in my, what is that called, scowl, and I say it in sort of a negative way? I think we're reading too much of the story of our own experience when we read that, because this is not a rude conversation. This isn't Mary going to Jesus, telling him what to do. This is Mary coming to Jesus saying there's a problem. And it isn't Jesus saying woman like he's mad at her. It's actually a very respectful way that they spoke to each other. In fact, a little bit later in John chapter 4, we're going to see the woman at the well, and he says woman. And he's not speaking to her in a derogatory manner. It's a respectful way of speaking. And so, I think that sometimes we read a little too deeply into this stuff here, our own conversations that we've had that can be quite negative. And so when you read that there, his mother ends that by saying, whatever he says for you to do that. Now, Jesus does ask a question, and she does raise a concern, and Jesus does something about it, but he says something that's kind of interesting in the middle there. Let's read it together. He says, what does this have to do with us, right? Whose problem is it? Is it their problem? Is it Mary and Jesus' problem? Is it the problem of the disciples? No, but there's a family that's at risk of being shamed by being in the situation. It says, what does this have to do with us? My hour has not yet come. And it's an interesting phrase because that doesn't mean anything to us the very first time we're reading the Gospel of John yet, right? Because if you've never read the Gospel of John, you don't know that several times in the next few chapters, all the way through to the end, you're going to see that Jesus is saying things like, my hour has not yet come, right? And he says that. At one point, they were going to take Jesus by force, and it says that they didn't do that. Why? Well, because his hour had not yet come. It wasn't time yet for something to happen. And then at the end of the gospel, we start seeing Jesus say things like, my time has come, my hour has now come. And then what follows that, of course, is the trial and the crucifixion of Jesus. We'll get to all that later, but he's saying that now is not quite yet the hour. And so there's this dilemma. We read that and we're like, well, is Jesus saying that he's not going to do anything about it? Is Jesus saying that he's just going to kind of move on and let them have their problem? We know the rest of the story. He actually does something about it. And so they have this exchange, and after the exchange, Jesus tells them to do something. He says, my hour has not yet come. Let me back up just a second here. I don't think that Jesus is refusing compassion here. I want to make sure I make this point. I don't think he's refusing compassion. Like, he could see the problem. I don't think that's what he's doing. I think that he's kind of refusing to act according to someone else's timing and someone else's authority. Jesus isn't going to do this so that he could be the one who saves the day, so to speak. The question is, for Jesus, am I going to save the day, or am I going to reveal my glory? And that's what's at stake here, revealing of his glory. Is he going to let people know who he is? Because once he reveals his glory, what's going to happen? Well, he's going to continue to do things that continue to reveal his glory. More and more people are going to know who he is, and throughout his ministry, this exchange of conversation between Jesus and his opponents gets increasingly difficult. Because the more he reveals of himself to be the Messiah, the more the opponents want to take him out. They want to kill him for it. And so, is this the hour? Is this now when this is going to begin? And what would be the results of him revealing his glory? And so Jesus does something about this there by his own authority and by his own timing. He chooses to do this. So he tells them to go out and to get some of these cisterns, right, and bring them to him and to fill them with water. And then he has them take this water, which, it was water, and he takes some of it to the head waiter, right? And the head waiter doesn't know what's going on, but the ones who brought it to him did know what was going on. And he tastes this wine. And he says, this is the good wine. This is the best wine. This is the wine that you wouldn't serve at the very beginning of a party like this or of a wedding like this. Normally, you would start with the good wine, and then as the senses dulled over a number of days, you would just kind of start serving the poorer wine, and that would be kind of the norm, but this is something different. What makes wine, we should answer this question real quickly, what makes wine better or worse? I am not a connoisseur of wine. I don't know what makes wine today better or worse. But it was pretty clear in the first century there were some things that made wine better and made wine, I almost said worser, but you know what I mean, right? It made it less better. And so, first of all, good wine came from fully ripened grapes. That was one thing. It was kind of the best of the crop. It came from proper fermentation, that it had been taken and had the right amount of time to be fermented properly. It was also, all wine in the first century was mixed with water, and these better wines were mixed with less water. It was not as diluted, and it was fresh. It was not spoiled over time. Well, the opposite of that is what made it poorer wine. So they would take sour, or they would take weakened grapes that had been crushed, for example, or that didn't grow quite properly, or maybe were just a little bit overripe, and they would take them and they would make wine out of that. It was heavily diluted with water, and it was what they would typically serve to guests much later in the process. And so what Jesus is doing is he comes along and he makes this wine that's this fresh wine that is the good wine, and he offers that to the guests. Best wine first, cheaper wine later, and yet Jesus reverses that, and he transforms this water that they had put in these pots that were used for ritualistic cleansing, and he turns it into the best wine, and he serves it to the people. And so This is a story, if you will, about Jesus revealing his identity, about Jesus revealing his glory. It's a story about Jesus offering people something that was better. He's not going to give you this subpar wine. He's going to do the thing that is absolutely the best. And so he produces this wine. Now, let's talk about this thing of transformation. This thing of transformation. What you may not be seeing here, and what you will see as we read through the whole gospel, is that there are a group of people who are Jesus' opponents. I mentioned them already, and you know who they are. They're the Pharisees, they're the Sadducees, they're the keepers of the law, they're the scribes. And as they would confront Jesus, they were confronting Jesus with this idea that your outward appearance, right, is what is most important. That you would be a keeper of the law, that you would do what you were supposed to do according to the law. And it didn't particularly matter where that came from. It didn't come from the heart. It came as an act of obedience, and not as an act of transformation from the inside out, if you will. And one of the things that we're going to see, and we start to see today, is that the Pharisees, they were very concerned about what was on the outside, not what was on the inside. Jesus comes along and he reverses that. In Matthew, in the sermon, he talks about this in a couple of ways. He says it's something like if you took a cup and it was dirty on the inside and on the outside, and you cleaned the outside and then you served it to somebody. Have you ever done that? You put a dish, like a cup in the dishwasher, and it gets washed, and then you get it out there. You start to pour some coffee into it, and you look, and like there's still some stuff in there. That's not clean on the inside, which is important to you. That it be clean on the inside also? I think so, right? Even more so on the inside, because that's where the contents go. He also says at one point that the Pharisees were like whitewashed tombs, right? They're beautiful on the outside, but what's on the inside of a whitewashed tomb, church? What is it? It's a dead body, right? You're full of dead bones, right? You're full of decay, but on the outside, you look like, well, everything's all right. And so, as Jesus is taking this ritualistic cistern and he's putting water into it and he's turning that into wine, this transformation that takes place, I think, begins to speak to us about the transformation that God is calling us to. Throughout the Bible, God has never wanted only our compliance. That's not what he's wanted. And I think that maybe we've harped on compliance and said, people need to keep the law. People need to, not just throughout Christian history, I'm talking about throughout religious history, keep the law. Just do what God expects of you. And God says things like, your sacrifices. You make these sacrifices and they stink to me. And you're thinking to yourself, well, God, you asked for those sacrifices, but they didn't come from the right place. You took an animal and you burnt the sacrifice, and it didn't come from your heart. It came from compliance. It came from a place that was not purified and transformed by what God wanted. He wants to be in relationship with us. He wants to be in covenant relationship with us. And as he has shown throughout the history, he has always been after our hearts. He has always been after us to be his people in a way that is authentic and real and connected, which is why he chose to communicate ultimately who he is through the incarnation of Jesus, that God would become flesh and he would live among us, and that he would reveal to us who God is, how God thinks, what he wants us to do by giving us the example through his life and through his words and through his actions. Religion, law-keeping, cleans the outside, right? But transformation is what happens on the inside when we become followers of Jesus from the heart. The Bible says in Colossians 1:27 that we have this mystery that has been revealed, that was hidden from ages past and generations. That is Christ in you, the hope of glory. He's looking to make us his people from the inside out. Jesus isn't just about provision. He will make the wine and provide it for the people. He is also about transformation. John calls this a sign. John calls this a sign, and that word in some Bibles is actually miracle or a wonder is what it is. Jesus begins his ministry of doing these miraculous things to reveal his power, to reveal his authority, to reveal his identity, to reveal his compassion. And in this sort of ordinary, everyday situation where people are gathered around, getting married and having a celebration together, Jesus enters into it. And in the midst of that, he introduces his glory. he does something that the disciples see for the first time. And when they see it, it says that the disciples then begin to believe in Jesus. That's the very last thing there. This is the beginning, he says in verse 11, of the signs that Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee, manifested, right, or revealing his glory, and the disciples believe. This quiet miracle, right, that Jesus does previews a greater hour that is yet to come when Jesus will again transform something else. You see, Jesus does transform the meaning of several things. He transforms people and lives, but at the end of this gospel, he's going to transform the meaning of a cross. You see, a cross was something that people viewed and saw death. They looked at it and saw the end of a person's life. They looked at a cross and they said in that hour that this person isn't winning. This person is absolutely losing everything. No one ever died on a cross and people looked at him and thought, wow, I wonder what they have in their future. They knew how this was going to end. And while they saw crosses with the meaning of death associated with it, how do we see crosses today? Now, yeah, certainly someone could be hung on a cross and killed, but the way we see crosses today ought to be more than jewelry on an earring or on a necklace. No one in the first century would have wanted to wear a cross as a way of decorating themselves to be seen. It was a symbol of death. Jesus has transformed it so that now we see new life. We see Jesus who died and who was buried and has been now raised from the dead to a newness of life. And he invites us to that same transformation. He invites us to see that transformation of moving from law-keeping to grace, moving from doing what we have to do out of compliance to doing it out of love and a desire to be pleasing to our Heavenly Father. And so I want to ask you today, as I've been asking, I'm going to keep asking, do you really, really love Jesus, right? Do you really, truly, deeply, absolutely love Jesus? And if you do, then I'm going to ask you today to invite Jesus in. Jesus works where he is welcomed. If you have not welcomed Jesus into your life to be his follower, he's not doing much work in your life, right? You need to invite him to the table, invite him into the home, invite him into your life, invite him into your heart, and that's where he begins the transformation process. Invite Jesus to the party, and he will act at the right time. Trust his timing. It may not have been the right timing, but Jesus decided it was the right timing after all. Trust his timing. It's not for you to manipulate God into what you want when you want it. That's not how this works. It's for you to put yourself into submission to God and wait for him in his own timing. Obey God fully. He said to go fill up the jars. How is that going to solve our wine problem, right? And you got to get, how's that going to solve it? And yet Jesus knew what he was going to do. Trust Jesus and obey him fully and expect abundance. Jesus isn't just going to restore you to the big old mess that you've always been. In the teen class this morning, we talked a little bit about that old self and the new self, that we are called away from that old self that died and was put away. And when we were baptized, we were buried with Christ and raised to a, what is it called, church? A newness of life. We were made a new creation in Christ. And we put away that old self and we embrace that new self. And we should expect abundance. He's not just going to do the bare minimum. He's going to take us from death to life in Christ. And the question is Jesus still turning water to wine? Is Jesus still turning water? Is he still taking ordinary lives and transforming them for his purposes? And my answer is, a good old Michigan, you betcha he is. Absolutely. I picked on the Southerners last week. I'll pick on the Northerners. We have our own issues. Every time we come to the end of ourselves and we appeal to Jesus to fill us again, he's going to answer that with abundance. He doesn't just offer us old wine mixed with a lot of water that's been diluted. He fills us again with new life, and he gives us the best. And he will transform us to make us new again, to give us new life, and to make us more than we ever could imagine in this life and in the life that is yet to come. In Ephesians chapter 2, I'm just going to jump into this thought for a second as we wrap up. In Ephesians 2, Paul says some very, very poignant things. He says that you were dead in your trespasses and sins. What can dead people do to make their situation better? Absolutely nothing. You were absolutely helpless in your trespasses and sins. And he says, but God, who is rich in mercy and love, has made you alive because of his great love and mercy. And he says, you've now been saved by grace through faith, and that not of yourselves, it's a free gift of God. And what he has done in that transformation, when you become his child, is he has made you what he calls in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10, he calls it, you become his workmanship. You are his workmanship, created in Christ to do good works. He's made you what we might call a masterpiece. And you might not think of that when you see that word, but poemi is the Greek word, and it means masterpiece, this work of art, that he has transformed you from whatever ordinary, difficult mess of a life you've had into something that is extraordinary, that's made in the image of God, made in the image of Christ, has been renewed and given all kinds of newness. Not ordinary. We're not ordinary. We are masterpieces, and we need to live into the life that he has transformed us to live into. Jesus ends chapter 1 by saying, come and see. And I'm going to end this lesson by saying, come and see. There's so much more that we're going to see Jesus do as he casts out demons, as he raises people from the dead, as he heals the blind and the sick and the lame, and as he interacts with the poor, as he crosses boundaries that people wouldn't cross by talking to a Samaritan woman in the middle of the day at a well. That's coming up in a couple weeks. I'm excited about that lesson. Come and see. Jesus is going to show us again and again what it means to be transformed and renewed for his glory. Let's pray together.